Psychology, a Scientific Discipline, Part 2. 8. Emergence of Cognitivism. During the 1950s and 1960s, psychoanalysis and behaviorism were replaced by the new perspective known as cognitivism. American psychologist named Ulrich Neisser is generally considered as the founder of cognitivism. Researchers in cognitive psychology study higher cognitive processes like memory, decision making, problem solving, intelligence, language, etc., with the tools like MRI and PET scans. Research methods in psychology. Experimental method. Experimental method is one of the most scientific method of studying behavior. It is the method which has assigned the status of science to psychology. In experimental method, the experimenter conducts experiments using following steps. First, identifying problem. Second, developing hypothesis. Third, selecting an experimental design and standardizing the experimental procedure. Fourth, conducting experiment and collecting data. Fifth, analyzing data. And sixth, drawing conclusions. Some of the important features of experimental method can be explained as follows. First, experimental method is one of the most objective method of collecting data. Second, it enables accurate observations in controlled conditions. Third, experimental method helps in finding out the cause and effect relationship between two or more variables. Fourth, the findings of the experimental method are verifiable. Do you know, certain aspects of human behaviors cannot be studied by the experimental method due to ethical constraints and some risk factors involved. Survey method. A survey is defined as a research method used for collecting data from a predefined group of respondents to gain information and insights on various topics of interest such as political opinion, consumers' preferences, etc. Survey method makes use of questionnaires, checklists, rating scales, inventories, interviews, etc. to collect the required information. The survey method is largely used by social psychologists, educational psychologists, industrial psychologists, etc. Survey method is an economic and an efficient method of data collection. Surveys can be undertaken using email, telephonic calls, or direct interaction with respondents. Observation method. Observation method is a research method which is very useful in the areas where experiments cannot be conducted. It is a method in which behavior is observed in a natural or laboratory setting. Observation carried out in a natural setting is called natural observation, and observation carried out in a laboratory setting is called controlled observation. Observation method is widely used by child psychologists, clinical psychologists, and social psychologists, etc. Observation method can be treated as a scientific method and will be beneficial when it is used with the specific purpose of the research and planned in a systematic way. Case study method. Case study is one of the qualitative research methods used in psychology. This method is mostly used by clinical psychologists. Sigmund Freud and John Piaget were the two important figures to use case study method wisely. Case study is an in-depth look at an individual, group, or a particular event. Case study can be treated as a scientific method as it provides rich descriptive information, often suggesting hypotheses for further studies. In case study method, a researcher collects information about a particular individual case from multiple sources such as parents, family members, peers, teachers, colleagues, etc. to assess the individual's current level of psychological functioning. A researcher, while using case study method, may use several techniques like observation, interview, psychological test, etc. to collect information about a particular individual. Correlation studies. There are certain scientific studies which make use of correlation as a statistical tool to understand the relation among variables. Such studies are called correlational studies. Correlation is a statistic tool used to measure the relationship between two or more variables. If the change in one variable appears to be accompanied by a change in the other variable, the two variables are said to be correlated, and this interdependence is called correlation. The extent of correlation between two variables is measured by correlation coefficient. A correlation coefficient is always a number between -1 to +1. The sign positive or negative of a correlation coefficient indicates the direction of the relationship between the variables. There are three types of correlation. First, a positive correlation. When both variables either increase or decrease at the same time, they are said to have a positive correlation between them. In case of positive correlation, the value of correlation is found between 0.00 and +1. For example, the amount of rehearsal and recall score. Second, a negative correlation. When an increase in one variable is associated with a decrease in the other and vice versa, they are said to have a negative correlation between them. In case of a negative correlation, the value of correlation is found between 0.00 to -1.00. For example, amount of exercise and level of body fats. Third, a zero correlation. When any chance in one variable brings no significant change in other variables, they are said to have a zero correlation. In case of zero correlation, the value of correlation coefficient is found to be zero. For example, height and intelligence.